alive to get your part of the passcodes. Look out!
You okay?
Yeah.
He's dead!
What are you gonna do?
Find out who he is.
Ron, it's such a pleasure to have you here to talk about your work and your life. You're a very highly regarded and very consistent working director and writer and also producer. Let's start in the beginning. Where were you born?
I was born in Barrie, Ontario, Canada, which is a small town.
So you're a real Canadian.
I'm a real Canadian, born and reared. It was a small town north of Toronto. And I lived outside of that town, a very small village that was literally a crossroads. There was maybe 150 people. You know, spent my formative years there, a very rural area. There wasn't a movie theater for miles. It was very much a one-room schoolhouse situation because all the fourth grade kids were bused from the community school to this one other place for some reason I've never figured out. And we're all bused to this little one-room place. And that core group of kids, I think there was maybe 25 or 30 of us. And this is essentially the tail end of the baby boom. And we stayed as friends from that fourth grade group. We stayed as friends all the way through high school, most into college, that went to college. And even some, a friend of mine from that group, that core group, was actually at the screening we had the other night for Something Evil Comes. He was in San Francisco on business and flew down and came. So we've all stayed friends, actually, over the years, and not close friends necessarily, but still people you stay in touch with.
That's pretty unusual.
It is, it is. But that was it was a very formative time because you had a group of kids who were stuck out in the middle of nowhere together. And there's this sense of community and sense of essentially family, really extended family. And you know, obviously the children all had different issues and different things going on. But you always had this sense of a group. And it's something that, as an adult, when I work on a film, I'm reminded of that when I get a crew together. I love the crew. I love the sense of crew and the sense of extended family that you create around that. And I think a lot of that stems from that experience. I used to rent a projector from the library and take home old movies and watch them on the weekends when I was like 11 or 12 years old. And I'd watch the Marx Brothers and Chaplin and the Stooges, you know, the classics. I like kids a lot, I have to say. I don't have any of my own, of course, I'm vegetarian. So, you know, you could grow them and then what do you do with them? But I do like kids. I love the energy of kids. When we did the Dennis the Menace Christmas picture with Maxwell Perry Cotton, remarkable child.
Well, he's very good.
Terrific. Isn't he terrific in the picture?
Yeah,
and he's a good actor. But I mean, a lot of the kid stuff we did with Goosebumps and Are You Afraid of the Dark and over the years, I really enjoy the energy of kids and the energy that they bring in front of the camera, especially if you get the ones that haven't been sort of drama schooled.
What were your parents like when you were growing up?
They're about the same as they are now, really. They were, my parents were great, to be honest. My father was a rockabilly singer-guitarist. He had his own band, his own TV show, and he was very a big celebrity in sort of the market of the Barrie television station that was up there in that area. So he would go out and do live shows and so on. And my mom was a model, and they met when she was, I think, 18 or 19. And she tells this great, possibly apocryphal story where she was packed, ready to go to New York to be a ballroom dancer because she was dancing and she had a dance partner. They met at some concert or something my father was doing. My mother fell head over heels in love with him that night. And she canceled her trip to New York to be a ballroom dancer and stayed there. And they got married not long after that, actually. And I came along sometime later because they were married for a few years before I showed up. They stayed together for 25 years, I think, something like that. And then eventually, they, as marriages between rock and roll stars and models often do, they just drifted apart eventually, So.
Where do they live now?
My mother lives in a place called Creemore, Ontario, which is famous in Canada for their beer, Creemore Springs Ale. And she's currently in the process of oddly moving to Palm Springs because she loves Palm Springs so much.
That's where you live.
Right,
now.
exactly. That's kind of what she was coming down for. So I'm of two minds about my mother moving to Palm Springs. On one hand, I love the idea of her living in a warm, happy climate.
Sure.
And I think it's important to be friends with your parents. But hanging out with them, I don't know if I'm really ready for that. So.
What kind of kid were you? What were you like when you were growing up? Were you outgoing and indolent, or were you shy?
No, I was never shy. Yeah, no, I was never a shy kid. It just didn't play. Like you could try it sometimes to see which mileage you could get out of being shy.
Right.
But you seem to get much more mileage about just being, sort of loud.
Well, you were yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Just be me. What kind of a kid was I? It's a good question. I'd like to think that I was clever and charming. My parents always told me that I was the most clever, the most charming, the most this, the most that, which wasn't necessarily true, clearly, but they made me feel that way, and that is so critical for a kid growing up, especially a gay kid growing up, because your self-esteem issues are so crucial to you. And I think that sort of first burst of self-esteem they gave me propelled me into the life that I was lucky enough to live, for better or for worse. And it's helped in the darkest possible times. To have a sense of self has always been really, really important.
And it's so hard for gay kids and young gay people because there aren't role models often, and it's just a struggle. At what point in your life did you begin to think that you were gay and think that this was something that you would have to deal with in your life?
Well, possibly it was the absolute moment of birth when, in fact, the doctor slapped me on the ass, and I looked up at it and said, "Oh, no, you don't." It may have been that moment.
That's early.
Very early in the development. Probably when I was like 3 or 4. As soon as you're consciously aware of the difference between boys and girls, and you're aware that you have virtually, in my case, virtually no interest whatsoever in girls, other than being, if they're lovely actresses, that's fine by me.
Sure.
Or good friends. But I think it was quite early on, and my mom still says to this day that she knew because I was probably the only kid who wanted to see Mary Poppins like 11 times.
So she kind of...
Absolutely, very, very early on. And it's not the sort of thing, because remember, this is the 60s. So this is not the sort of thing that one discussed. Having a gay child was not something that one talked about openly.
Even today, it's hard for
of
parents
course.
to struggle with it.
Yeah. But back then, there wasn't even a word for it. There was, of course, a word, but where I grew up, there just simply wasn't even acknowledged.
Sure.
But it's interesting because I knew what I was really early, and again, part of it is the self-esteem thing given by my folks, but also it was just the sense that I knew I was different, and I knew that I didn't belong where I was in so many ways, and I knew that this was just part of that. I think it made the idea of being gay far less, not significant, but far less difficult, far less challenging, because I knew it was just part of everything else. I'm this, I'm this, I'm this, I'm this, and none of this works here.
How long were you at home until you left to go off and do something else?
During high school, I was a magician, and which I still am, really. And I used to travel to do shows, so I'd be away from home for quite a long period of time doing shows around.
What got you interested in that?
I loved the idea of illusion and subterfuge. And telling a little story with the trick and then the surprise, the twist ending, Love that. So I did it for birthday parties and so forth, and eventually did nightclubs and toured a little bit. So I was away from home quite a bit, and then somebody saw me do a magic show and hired me to come and host a television show in a place called Peterborough, which is also in Ontario. It's in just outside Toronto, called the Silver Basketball, and it's a kids show. And I was the host of the show, and every day these kids, it's a bit suspect in retrospect, but at the time it seemed fine. There was this guy, me, in a t-shirt, a yellow t-shirt with a basketball on it, playing basketball in a park. Now the idea of me playing basketball is still beyond the pale.
Right.
We actually had to have a stunt hand come in and do the ball toss. So all these kids would come, 5 kids, the regulars, would show up at the park. "Hey Ron, what are we going to do today?" And again, in retrospect, you're thinking, children, park, strange guy, by himself. Not so much. But at the time, it seemed fine. So it was a daily program, and I hosted this show for a long time. And I actually just recently got an email from somebody who tracked me down through one of the websites and found me and sent me an email saying that they still, to this day, remember that show, remember seeing me and seeing all these kids and stuff, and how it was a wonderful show to watch and so on.
Was this one of your first experiences with show business?
Very much so. I performed magic a couple times on TV, but as a rule, I was mostly a live performer. And then this was, that show was the very first thing. And then when I finished that, I went off to Club Med for a vacation for a couple of weeks, and they invited me to stay and direct the stage shows there. And so I stayed at Club Med for, I think, 6 months. And that was the first time I actually really directed, in terms of theater. Now, obviously, you're directing a lot of mildly intoxicated beach bums in G-strings, which I still really, in theory, am, actually, now that I think about it.
From time to time.
From time to time, yeah.
Were you interested in film at this point? Were you watching movies? And
Absolutely. When I was in high school, I made movies, in the drama class, or I guess English class. We made films, very experimental, sort of, very avant-garde, Super 8 films with people popping in and out of frame and so forth.
What kind of movies did you tend to like?
I loved film noir when I was like 12. I think I saw Detour for the first time.
Yes.
Edgar Ulmer's picture. And I just thought this was the most hallucinogenically brilliant movie making, because you knew it was artificial and you knew there was a sense of falseness to it that told more truth than so-called reality does, which is one of the things I am attracted to in that kind of work. The same as like the monster movies in the 50s. I love all the old monster movies. I love horror films. I don't get to make nearly enough horror movies. I would kill to make horror movies. I love them. Those two genres were the things I really loved. And then the classic comedy stuff. I love the Marx Brothers. Love the Marx Brothers.
Okay.
And Chaplin, and the Stooges a little less, but the classic
Well, you've
stuff.
worked in a lot of different genres. And the one genre I've been struck by for you is the film noir genre. There aren't too many people around who do it as well as you do with such style. And have you watched a lot of those movies and learned from those movies and tried various things based on that?
Very much so. I have to cop to that, very much so. And I think much of it is an aesthetic choice because, again, I love the sense of artifice. It's one of the things that keeps me outside of doing a lot of sort of popular, which is to say, I don't want to denigrate people's work, but sort of Walmart movies. And by that I just mean that things that seem not really directed, they just seem to occur. And I don't think I like films that just seem to occur. I know they don't, but movies that seem like they've just happened and someone put the camera in the corner and let it happen, I don't like that. I like movies where you can very clearly feel the hand of someone creating them. And I think that's part of the film noir thing for me, is that they were under such pressure with those films,
Yeah, they sure were.
Much as we are today with the sort of films that we make, they're under time constraints and budgetary constraints and artistic constraints. And you find yourself looking to those films, and Detour was made in 6 days. Brilliant. I tell people all the time now, look, Casablanca was made in 18 days. And everybody says, oh, we make movies in anywhere from like 12 to 15, 16 days if we're lucky. And they say, how do you make a movie that fast? Well, what you do is, it's like the Michelangelo theory. You take what you have, you chip away whatever isn't the statue of David, and whatever's left over is the statue of David. And that seems to make sense when you're making these kind of films.
How did you segue from a magician and an entertainer and a theater director to the movies?
First of all, I mean, I'm the luckiest human being on the planet, because I just seem to fall into doing the things that I love. And when I came back from Club Med, I wrote a script about working at Club Med. And basically, because I had been watching movies for so long, I had a sense of film grammar, if you will.
Sure.
So I kind of knew how it worked. And I went to the store and bought a book on script formatting, so you would know. And this is before computers were generally used.
Right.
You would use your what the hell is it called? Typewriter. Oh my God.
Right.
I used your typewriter, electric typewriter, the IBM Selectric. And so I thought, okay, well, I'll write a script, because I didn't know what I was going to do. So I sat down and wrote a script about Club Med. And it was a comedy, and it was a bit broad and a bit silly. Probably would do very well now. in the world of comedy we do now.
Yes.
But at the time I wrote the thing and I thought, okay, that's fine. So I sent it as a sample out to literally out of the phone book, picked 4 or 5 production companies in Toronto and sent it out as a script sample, cold.
Okay.
Exactly what you're not supposed to do because no one's going to read that. But by the sheer luck of the draw, it ended up in 2 places, and one place called me and said, we'll option the script for like $500 or something. The other place said, we don't want to option the script. We like how you write. Why don't you come, we'll talk to you, and we want to talk to you about coming in and writing for us and doing some sort of contract writing work.
Okay.
And so I went to them, and it was a gentleman in Toronto by the name of Peter Simpson, who's since passed on, and his wife Alana, and at the time they had a guy named Ray Sager working with them, and Paul Lynch, also a director.
Yes.
Now, Paul, I had known his work through Prom Night, which I had gone to see, when I was out of high school. Sure. And Ray Sager, I realized the first time I met him was the Wizard of Gore in the Herschel Lewis Gordon film of the same name. Herschel Gordon Lewis. Oops. Sorry, Hirsch. So I was like, wow, this is an interesting thing I've found myself in.
Yes.
And so I talked with them, and they hired me contractually. I think it was on a 6-month contract, and every 6 months they could renew or decline. And I just wrote for them, and I wrote probably 15 scripts, and just developed scripts and developed whatever I wanted to write, which was a wonderful thing.
Yes.
Didn't pay a lot of money, but enough to get by. I was living on my own
What an
apartment.
unusual opportunity, really,
Yeah.
to
Oh,
do
absolutely.
that, and to just do a lot of work.
Absolutely. And knowing that eventually it might get made.
Right.
It was really remarkable. And in retrospect, I maybe didn't appreciate it as much as I should have at the time, because you never do. But in retrospect, to know the gamble somebody takes on you for that kind of thing, it wasn't, again, not a whole lot of money, but they weren't a big company. Peter's company wasn't huge. So they had a big success with Prom Night. They did another film after that that was also successful. I forget, some family film. And then they wanted to do a sequel to Prom Night. They wanted to do Prom Night 2. So I had written one of the stories we'd written in our collective little writing times, a thing called The Haunting of Hamilton High. And it was a ghost story set in a high school and possessed girl and so on. It was about a prom queen who dies in the 50s and comes back to get her crown back in the 80s. And we worked on it a little bit, and suddenly we were making the movie, and we made it for $4.5 million, which in 1986, I guess we shot that film. The director was a man named Bruce Pittman, and they shot it out in Edmonton. It was my very first time making a movie, and here we are. We had $4.5 million to make a movie that I had written.
It's a pretty good budget at that time. Really.
Absolutely, pretty good budget today. But it was like really a remarkable thing. And I remember getting a phone call. It was the strangest experience. Getting a phone call at like, oh my gosh, it must have been 11 o'clock at night when suddenly the financing had come through and we're starting prep on Monday. And can I be on a plane to fly to Edmonton from Toronto? And so off I went Monday morning, packed my bags and went out there. And that was my first experience with per diem, which is kind of like manna from heaven.
Right.
And the first experience with like a full-on crew and a full team and everything doing this. And it was wonderful. I spent 3 months out there and made this movie. Movie came out in Canada. We went back, we had to do some reshoots on it, which was also a great experience because we did a little bit of reshooting. It wasn't scary enough, essentially. Bruce, the director, a terrific director, a wonderful drama guy, but not really good with the scary so much. And so the producer, Peter, said to the editor and I, why don't you guys go cut the movie down to something taut that really works, and then whatever you need for scary stuff, we got a little extra money left over for reshoots, because Peter really believed in reshoots, very much the Woody Allen school of filmmaking. And so we went and reshot a good chunk of the movie. I learned more about writing by editing that movie down, about how little you really need. How little, in terms of the scenes can be short and quick and to the point and get in and get out fast and how that really works. And that taught so much about writing a film. So then we went and directed this thing. And I'd never directed, of course, other than, obviously drunk tourists and so forth.
Sure.
So off we go to do some reshoots in this sort of old PCB-laden plant in Toronto where everybody used to shoot things. And we shot.
So you were directing the reshoots?
Yes,
Oh.
myself and the editor.
Okay.
So Peter basically gave us free rein and said, go and, because I knew horror movies inside out, and the editor, Nick Rotundo, a terrific guy, and so we figured out what shots we needed, what scenes we needed. We storyboarded, and we went out there, and between the two of us, directed this reshoot.
What a great experience.
Oh my God, yes, absolutely. Remarkable. And so we did it, put it together, put the movie together. And then it was time to go to the American film market. And so we went to the film market, and it was this, again, it was this crazy experience, because keep in mind, I had done nothing like this a year earlier. So suddenly, a year later, I'm at LAX with a shopping cart with my film in it, going to the AFM by myself, because they figured you're going to go down for it, so you might as well take the movie. I'm pushing a shopping cart with my movie, my first film, through the thing, looking for my little, where's the guy with the sign? Went to the film market, and we screened it at the Hitchcock Theater at the old Warner lot.
Sure.
I mean, everybody was there. It was extraordinary. And the movie, to this day, the movie's okay. It's not great, but it's okay. And it certainly worked for that audience, and it worked that day. And we sold it to the Samuel Goldwyn Company, and it came out in the theaters. I remember going, after the Hitchcock screening, going across the Formosa and just sitting there in shock because people had clapped at this movie, because there's nothing you can do at that point, right? It's done.
And you don't know how people are going to
You
react
do not
to this
know how
stuff,
they're
particularly when you, at that point, didn't know that much about what you were doing. You were just learning.
It was like having your first draft read aloud in front of class. This is very telling. And it opened a week before in Canada. The Canadian production company had their distribution deal in Canada. And they opened the movie in Canada. And the reviews, to say they were scathing would be like saying that Saddam Hussein was cranky. They were vile reviews. I mean, cruel, mean.
I'm surprised to hear that. The picture is not that bad.
Arguably,
I've
sure.
seen many worse.
Okay, fair enough. But I guess in Canada they hadn't. And so they just lacerated us and lacerated me and and so this is basically, we had a premiere party on the Thursday night, big bash, it was so much fun. Friday morning, open the papers, it was classic. I was like all about Eve, reading the papers. Well, what did that fish wife say now, And I'll read the thing, and I was like, Addison DeWitt, he's killed me. Because there was like literally just horrible reviews. And I'm in the living room in my apartment just going, well, my career's over. It's Friday morning and my career is now over, and that's that. So the following week, it was a bit grim. I mean, it didn't make a lot of money in Canada. And so it was a bit grim, but the following week it was going to open in the States. And everybody's like, well, you've got a big opening down there. It was opening in maybe 500 theaters. It was a good opening for that time.
Sure.
And so just, it'd be fine. And I thought, all right, well, everybody's being all nice to me. And I remember I was at the photocopying machine, copying the next script I was working on. And I glanced down at the fax machine, because we all had fax machines then, at the fax machine, and it was spewing out this review from the Los Angeles Times, from dear Kevin Thomas of the Los Angeles Times. And the headline of the review said, and this is a week later, headline said, imagination, I forget even what the actual headline was, but it was this, imagination is the key to this wonderful movie. And the review was like, the first line was, Hello Mary Lou, Prom Night 2, is the blue velvet of high school horror movies.
Well, that's a pretty good one.
Right? And
This is what Kevin said?
this is what Kevin Thomas said in the Times. And I saw this come out, and the world spun, literally, as this thing came out, because I'm ready to quit the business.
Right.
And this rave comes out.
You had your wrist ready for slashing.
Honestly, I was rolling the sleeves up going, just take me now. And there was this review, and I couldn't believe it. And the whole review was just lovely. And I mean, he got the movie, and he'd said, don't take it terribly seriously. It's a lot of fun. It's a bit campy and a bit of a romp, but it's very imaginative. And director Pittman and writer Oliver have really done, and he just I know this because I can't remember the headline, but it's sitting on my wall amongst all this other stuff. But it's that one review, the only review I ever put up, because that was the first one that made a difference.
Well, he has saved more than a few careers by seeing something that other people don't see. He really is quite marvelous in that regard.
Well, he certainly saved my ass, and I just thought, wow, that's an incredible thing. And then the New York Times review came out. I think Clive Barnes reviewed it for some reason. I think it was Clive Barnes. And he was very complimentary as well. I mean, everybody got it. The American reviews got it. And so at that moment, I decided I was going to leave Canada and move to the States, because I was obviously, as a genre filmmaker, there was no hope for me. And this is in the late 80s. There was no hope for me. I was going to just pack up and leave. And so I did.
Did you, in fact, move to the States at that point? And did you do a lot of TV work, or did you do...
I was in the process of moving when we actually ended up doing Prom Night 3, which was, oddly, the sequel to Prom Night 2, because there were so many, I guess, unanswered questions in Prom Night 2. That's a tragic story, too, now I think about it. Because we had dinner the movie was being financed by Live Entertainment, by IVE at the time. And we had dinner with Jose Menendez and Kitty and the boys
Oh boy.
at Trader Vic's here in LA, maybe a week before. And so there we are, it was a wonderful time and everything. Oh, and we're gonna make the movie, and oh, the papers are signed, and Ron's gonna direct it, and it's gonna be great, because I had written the script for Prom Night 3 at the same time as Prom Night 2, because I knew I wanted to do a sequel, but a more Faustian version of it. And so I wrote the script and kept it in the drawer. And then when it was like, suddenly they made some money down here, and they said, okay, well, we'll make a sequel, and not as much budget, but there you are. And so we did. And so everything's all signed, sealed, and delivered, and we all go home. We fly back to Canada. We're going to make the movie, because I was just in the process of leaving. It was like, we'll make one more movie in Toronto, because I'm going to direct this one. And that was on I guess we got home on the Sunday. Monday morning, Peter Simpson again, calls me into the office and said, well, we have a situation. What? Well, Jose and Kitty have been murdered.
What?
What? I'm sorry. I mean, I know the script had some problems, but my God. And he said, no, they've been murdered, and we don't know who did it or anything at all. And so my first reaction was, so how far does this push our start date? You know, so
A normal reaction.
Yeah, I think so. It's fair. It's film. It's a movie business. You know, it's a cutthroat business. Anyway, so it only pushed us by 2 weeks, oddly enough, because everything was in the paperwork was all in motion. But oh my God, like what a. And then it got even worse, of course, when you found out that the boys were involved.
Yes.
And, you know, especially because I kind of had a crush on the one, who I still maintain to this day would be a great date. Because when he finally gets out of jail, he'll get a seat at any restaurant in this town. Because everybody knows him. They're not going to want to cross him up.
Right.
You know. And he's already killed 2 people. He's what are the chances of him killing again? You'd be quite safe.
I think the percentages are in your favor.
Very much in my favor. So, anyway, so we made Prom Night 3. I got to direct that, and it came out, and it was just a straight to DVD release and so on, and it did okay, did some money, not a lot. And then I did a movie just after that. Then I moved to LA proper, and had a phone call. I was here maybe a month, and I had a phone call from, at the time, New Line. They put money up for us to do this other script I wrote called Liar's Edge, which was about a schizophrenic kid whose father goes over the falls in a barrel in Niagara Falls. He's a stuntman. And he dies, and the kid has these fantasies and gets involved in the murder. And it's a very sort of Lynchian, kind of Twin Peaksy world, that kind of a world in Niagara Falls. I remember having to go and literally on one knee beg the city fathers in Niagara Falls to let us shoot the murder scenes down in the tunnels under the falls. And we shot on location there for 3 or 4 days. And it was wonderful. Just a very atmospheric movie. They marketed it as a women in peril film, because Shannon Tweed was in it. Shannon and I got on great, because I was the first director who ever didn't want her to undress in a movie. And she said, I can't believe it. I said, well, honey, you know, all due respect, but. And Joe Bottoms was in it, and David Keith, and Chris Plummer. Fabulous cast, right?
It's a really interesting movie.
Oh, thanks.
Actually.
Thank you.
And very unusual. I really like it.
Oh, I'm glad. Thank you. I really loved making that movie. I loved writing it and directing it. And it was one of those things where you just sort of go and let things happen with the film.
What happened after that?
And then I did nothing. Yeah, for about a year I did nothing. I was living here in Los Angeles, in West Hollywood, right in the belly of the beast. And I was sitting at what at the time was the Abbey, back when the Abbey was across the street from where it is now. There's a little hole-in-the-wall coffee shop. And I was sitting there feeling sorry for myself, and the phone rang. I didn't even have an agent, because I came down to Los Angeles without an agent, with no contacts other than the people who I'd worked with in films.
Sure.
And I had a phone call from a guy who was doing a kids series in Montreal, and they had seen Prom Night 3. And they liked the sensibility of that movie, because it was a little campy and funny and a little gross and gory and stuff. They figured that was perfect for a kids series, a kids horror series.
Sure.
So a guy named DJ McHale, who created the show, and it was called Are You Afraid of the Dark? And he said, we'd like you to do the first one of this series. And so I went up to Montreal, and I remember, oh God, feeling so great, because they sent the script over by courier to my apartment here in Los Angeles, and I felt quite the proper director. You know, ooh, here's the script. And then I had to go and put my dark glasses on and go to the coffee shop and sit down and read my script. I'll be reading my script here for a little while. Please don't bother me, I'm reading my script. We're shooting the script. So I read this thing, and it was cute, fun, silly, crazy kid thing. And I went to Montreal, and we started work on it. And about 2 days, first day of shooting, I was late to set, because I think I got lost or got stuck in traffic or something again. and was late, and was like, oh, great, first day on a TV show, because they don't, it's not like the movies, which is a little loosey-goosey sometimes, whereas on a TV thing, it's like bangity, bangity, bang. And I was late, and the producer took me out for breakfast the next morning, because it wasn't a great day. I was used to a film schedule, not a TV schedule, and I think we were behind or something, and anyway. So, and it was great during prep, and creatively it was really good, but they were really concerned about the nuts and bolts of it, and can you do this?
Sure.
And I said, well, I'm going to give it a shot. You know what, maybe I can't. Maybe I'm not cut out for this particular world. So the next day, they had seen the rushes from the first day, and the studio guys and the guys at Nickelodeon who did it came over the next day and said, fantastic, this thing looks amazing, it's brilliant. And nobody ever grumbled ever again. And we got back on schedule the next day, because I was like, oh, okay, you do it like this. And then there you go. And that sort of aesthetic of doing something, trying to be artistic, but in a time frame, has served me rather well, because it trained me, and I stayed there with that show. After that first episode, I kept coming back, and I think I did, all told, 36, as we did 5 seasons, so 65 shows. I probably did 40 episodes of that show, 35 to 40 episodes.
That's a lot of work.
It was a lot of work. From there, I went to London and did a TV movie there for Nickelodeon called The Tomorrow People, which is a science fiction movie. And we shot with a real schedule at 30 days, and we shot all over London. Everywhere. It was the most remarkable time. We shot a stunt in Piccadilly Circus. And so I got to spend all this time there, and then went to Nottingham right after that, because another production company hired me for a series for Showtime called Crisscross. And we went up there, and we won a Cable Ace Award for that, and a Genesis, a bunch of awards for that thing. It was really fun. We were in Nottingham, England for the better part of 6 or 7 months, shooting up there. And so that really began this whole time of these international co-productions, because then I went to Paris and did The Hardy Boys Meet Nancy Drew in Paris. And it was great, because you're in Paris, you know, and you're in the morning, you get up and you look out your balcony, and there's the Eiffel Tower in your backyard. And again, this is a kid who, you know, in a town of 150 people, the idea of getting out of that town was amazing to me. So to be able to travel like that was incredible.
When you were young, did you aspire to do a bit of travel and to see different things?
Not particularly, to be honest. I was so focused on making film. I knew I wanted to make stuff. And so the idea of traveling as a side effect to the work is wonderful. It was a wonderful thing, and it's been a wonderful thing, continues to be. I got to go to Berlin. I lived in Berlin for almost a year on something, and New Zealand for Kiss Me Deadly, and Africa. So, you know, to be able to travel like that has been one of the great pleasures of it. And it's funny because you have to work very hard to take yourself out of the film when you're in those places. It's very easy just to go to set, go back to the hotel, and go to bed.
You had done at that point a lot of TV. Did that continue to be what you did at that time?
Television was pretty much the game at that time for me. I did a lot of stuff that we shot in Canada. I did Goosebumps, Bob Stein's book series, which was a tremendous hit.
You did a lot of those.
Yes.
And they're very good.
Thank you.
They're fun.
Very fun. And that was a tremendous crew. We did 5 seasons of that, I think, too.
And what did that work consist of when you were showrunning?
I wrote the scripts based on Bob's books. Usually you take there's usually 1 or 2 really great ideas in the books, you pull them out, and that's what the show would be. And oversaw the casting and basically everything a producer would do. You know, and I had obviously my other producers there. I worked with Bill Siegler. Wonderful experience, and it's one of those life-changing experiences because you make those friends that stay with you, and also being able to make something that the last episode of it that we ever did was called Cry of the Cat, and it's sort of a meta episode because we basically deconstruct Goosebumps and show how we made Goosebumps, but then it becomes a scary movie in and of itself, and it twists on itself.
Yes.
And there's a guy playing me in the movie, and it's really, that was my most favorite script and favorite show to do of that bunch. And I sent the script to Bob and Jane Stein, who oversaw, they had veto on all the scripts.
Sure.
And they called me up and said, we read this script, and at first we thought, you're crazy. And then Bob decided it was his favorite script of them of all 65 episodes. And it was really fun to do, and you got to just direct the crap out of it, you know. And I got a DGA nomination for that, so it was fun.
Since that time, you've worked a lot in television movies and also movies that went to the theaters. You've worked in a lot of different genres. You've done horror, and then a lot of film noir and thriller type work, which I believe you have a terrific affinity for. I don't think there are too many people who can do that as well and as capably as you can.
Thank you.
And create the kind of atmosphere you do and the look, the lighting that you do with those. And then you've also done family films. You did a film for us called Chasing Christmas with Tom Arnold and you did a film recently, which is A Dennis the Menace Christmas with Robert Wagner. How was that experience?
Wow. Well, working with RJ, which is what you get to call him, which
Yes.
is kind of fantastic.
You guys struck up quite a nice friendship
Oh, yes.
as a result of
Oh,
that,
yeah,
which is-
absolutely. I still see him.
What a thrill.
Oh.
Really.
Well, especially because when I was a kid, I used to wear an ascot to school because Robert Wagner wore them. And It Takes a Thief. We were trying to work the deal with RJ to do the picture.
Sure.
And it wasn't looking good for schedule because he was doing something in London. And so we were supposed to start on a certain date, and we had to finish and so on, and it wasn't going to work. And I spoke to him on the telephone. He calls me and says, Ron Oliver? Yes, this is Robert Wagner. I'm like, oh, hi. And we're at dinner, right? I get up, I leave. I'm like, goodbye. Hi, how are you? So we get talking, and he said, I don't think it's going to work. I just wanted you to know I'm so sorry. I love the script and what you did with it, and I think it'd be a lot of fun. But and I said, I told him the story. I said, this is really important to me that you know this. Next morning, phone rings. If we could push our start date by one day, we can have RJ. And I just about cried. And so, anyway, he comes to Montreal, where we shot this thing. Comes to Montreal, up there on the first day, get to meet RJ Wagner, and it was just wonderful. You know, he's one of the last links with old Hollywood,
Yes.
which is very important
There
to
are
me.
not many of them around who are really like that.
I'd like to think, let's say, that if I had been around doing what I'm doing now back in the late 40s, I would have been able to work for PRC and work in that world of making sort of these modestly budgeted films in a world that really supported that kind of work, and it would
Yes.
have been just astounding. But anyway, so I love that world. So RJ, and he was great on set, great with the kids. We had problems here and there with weather changing and everything. I mean, just all of
Yes.
which I went into on the commentary
Yes.
on the DVD. And but he was great, and he actually he waived his turnaround one day because we were having some weather problems, and to help the crew out. I mean, he just is the most extraordinary gentleman. And I said to him, where did you learn this? Star School, Ron, Star School. It's like, oh my God, that's the exact answer. And then his makeup and hair guy, Lon, he's been with him for like 50 years. Lon's been doing makeup and hair for everybody. Lon Bentley, for years. And Lon has his makeup box he's had ever since the dawn of time. He's the calmest man in the world. And when things were hitting the fan on that movie, and we were having all these problems, and you'd turn around and Lon would just be there, this will all pass. It's like having Buddha on set with you. It was incredible. And he was great. And he would actually do little things. Like, I think there's a scene where RJ got a whack in the back of the head or something, and he's walking through this next scene, so he should have responded a little bit to it. And we're about to do it, and he hadn't done it. And Lon kind of looked at me and went, do one of these. And I was like, oh, right, the head. And whatever, Arch, don't forget that. Oh, okay, good. And I mean, my first reaction when they said we were having RJ Wagner's personal hair and makeup guy come on set.
Oh,
I was
dear.
like, oh, great. And we're going to have this guy, and it's more money, and what are we going to do? There goes my crane shot. And then he gets there, and the movie would not have been as good as it turned out had it not been for him on set. He's remarkable. Those two guys, incredible. And RJ's wife, Jill, is just, I completely mortified myself by saying, when I met her, said, oh, you're like my first Bond girl. Diamonds Are Forever, my first grown-up Bond movie I ever saw by myself when I was a kid, and you were like the Bond girl, you're incredible. And I went, wow, I probably shouldn't be saying that to you, should I? Because, I'm 47.
Well, she was beautiful then and is beautiful now.
Of course, oh yeah.
But you make a really interesting point. One of the things you've done very effectively is work on your craft, and doing all the TV you did, and then right now you're doing a lot of movies. That's very unusual, and what a nice thing to be able to do.
It really is a nice thing to be able to do, and every morning I wake up, I know exactly how lucky I am to be doing it. And I think that a lot of it is trying to get that sense of that time. The idea that, a director back then, you worked in your craft and you just directed everything that came down the pipe.
Yes.
You worked in every single movie you could because it helped you hone your craft. And I had always said, the first two movies that I made, first three, I guess, but the first two I directed, I had always wished that I had done all the television that I had done before those movies, because I would love to take another kick at the cat on Mary Lou Maloney. the idea of the dead prom queen coming back from the grave, I would love to remake that thing because there's a great story there, and I don't think I did it justice. I would love to go back and revisit it and do it, knowing what I know how to do now.
Sure.
You know, being able to do that. And it's the same old thing. But what's been great is the movies that you and I've made together, and the pictures that I've made for other folks. They've been so varied. You know, so many different genres to dip into and to try each one. You know, because you want to be like this sort of cross between sort of Howard Hawks,
Yes.
who did arguably every genre. He did the best of each genre film, I think. Somewhere between there and Ed Wood Jr., I guess, is where I probably am hovering. But you know, but you do kind of try to get that aesthetic.
It's an interesting juxtaposition between those two directors.
Yeah.
That's quite a gambit.
Yeah, it is kind of, and I don't know that they're all that far apart, frankly, because I mean Ed Wood's crazy, but man, you can still watch those movies.
Yes.
You know, when I was a little kid, PlanetOut from Outer Space came on television on the Late Show on the local TV channel, and that was like this hypnotic film. I couldn't not watch it, and you were aware that it was just there's something wrong with this movie, horribly wrong, but it was so entertaining.
Yes.
And so just like the images were so riveting that to this day, obviously, it's, I think, arguably one of the more important films that have come out of American cinema because it really begot so much work, so much, I think, vision for other directors who looked at it and went, A, well, if he can do it, I can do it, right? And, you know, and B, the sense that those images are so, I mean, who can forget Tor Johnson climbing out of a grave? Now,
Yes.
Granted, he has a hard time climbing out of the grave. He's a bit lumbering, but that makes the movie all the better, you know. And
Yes. Now, you've done a number of what we call dual-purpose pictures where you shot really two movies or two versions of the movie, one in which the characters have a gay storyline and one in which they do not. What are the particular challenges or difficulties of doing something like that?
the logistics of it are the trickiest thing because essentially what we're doing is taking away the gay to make the straight movie. Just because for the various contractual issues, you can't have alternate scenes. You can't sort of go, here's the gay scene, here's the straight scene, we'll shoot them both, because then it becomes a problem down the road for various union reasons. I think that they're fools for doing it that way, but what do I know? I'm just the director. But anyway, we end up shooting a gay film and then just pulling the gay, I won't say the gay sensibility because, oh boy, it never gets out. But but just the gay scene where it's like the boy kisses the boy. In the straight scene, he just walks past him, you know, in the straight cut of the movie. And it's not really that difficult because you're shooting a little bit more and you're pulling out in the editing room. But what's hard to do is to try to shoot the films in a way that there's a certain aesthetic neutrality. Because my sensibility, when I'm making a gay film, quote unquote, I allow my sensibilities to be very focused on the world in which I live. Because as a gay man, I have a certain point of view.
Sure.
And when you make a film, you have a certain point of view. And to have the two merge is heaven. And they do in the Strachey movies, for example.
Yes.
And then when we do something like Kiss Me Deadly, the original version of that, the gay version of that film, clearly is that movie. And then the straight version, it still seems a bit odd. There seems to be something, even when you take the gay out, there's still there's little moments where it just feels kind of like, shouldn't they be, I feel like this should be happening here or there. And it's very tricky. And to try to get that to work and make sure that in the editing process you get all the gay out so it has an integrity unto itself, that's really the hardest part of it.
And usually, I think, in my opinion, the gay version ends up being the better version.
It's also interesting that how little you actually have to take out to make it a straight version of the film. Because the differences between the gay and the straight version of life are so minimal. They really are minimal. And that's evidenced in these films, is that you look at them and go, side by side, the differences are really tiny. It's one of the inadvertently political things that we do, is by saying, side by side, there ain't that much difference, guys.
Well, it's one of those kind of subversive things that you do in some of your films and Here TV has done, which is to treat gayness as a non-issue. And it's just part of who the characters are, but it's not necessarily what the movie's about.
Right.
And that's kind of a leap forward of sorts as to how these movies are done.
It's a huge leap forward, and I'll tell you why. For me, for years when I was doing stuff, my television work and so on, I did a few episodes of Queer as Folk. And that was the first time I had ever done anything that was gay, which is to say, had a gay sensibility, and I was able to have my own experience go unfiltered onto the screen. And that gave me a serious hunger for the material. The problem was that so many of the gay films were about being gay, or they were about, it was, you know, AIDS, or it was about coming out and all this stuff.
Yes.
And I mean, a lot of it just seems so movie of the week to me, because for me anyway, and I know that I live in a fairly rarefied environment, but it seemed that we'd moved past that. Surely we can just have these things where people are just gay. And then I'll never forget the thrill that I had the first time I read Third Man Out, when that script came, because I had just finished doing Blood Angels, which is basically girls in negligees with fangs, you know, kicking ass, and Lorenzo Lamas is the Lord of the Undead, which he is. And Third Man Out came on the desk, and they said, here, take a look at this. And when I first saw it, I misread it, and I thought it said Thin Man Out, and I thought, oh, I love the Thin Man movies. So I started to read it, and by the sheer surprise of it all, it was about a private eye and his boyfriend. And the original script had a little less of the private eye and boyfriend, and a lot more just sort of the case, and it was based pretty much solidly on the book. And I said, this is great, but I think it needs to be more the thin man. I would love to see the boyfriends be front and center in the stories.
Sure.
Let's do that, because I've never seen that. But the fact that it was just a guy who was a private eye, and that's his boyfriend, was so resonant to me, and it just rang a bell, and I'll never forget that moment of just reading the script in the office and just going, oh my God, I think I found my gay movie.
You have done such a brilliant job with those, and of the, you know, the 150 movies that Paul and I have made together, I think there's 4 so far that you've made. Those are some of the ones that I'm most proud of, that the work is just so stylistic, and the banter between the characters is so good, and the stories are good.
Yeah.
So they have a lot to offer.
Well, the groundwork was laid by Richard Stevenson's books. And then with our writers, Richard Stevenson on the first one, and Ron McGee has taken the reins over the last 3 brilliantly.
Yeah, very good.
Oh, he's terrific. And it's one of those things where often the director comes in and you do a director's polish on the script. Sometimes the director's polish is a bit more of a director's scraping and shoveling and moving around. But with Ron McGee's scripts, all I do usually is a little rinse on the boyfriend dialogue. And I usually try to inject whatever's going on in my relationship with Eric into those things so he has something to look at.
Right.
So on the other hand, Death, Donald and Timmy's relationship is challenged when somebody from Timmy's past, an old boyfriend, comes in and sort of causes a little wedge.
Yes.
And in the original script, it was set up so that Chad's character, Donald, gets jealous in the movie and upset that this old boyfriend's come back. And I got thinking, that's not really what goes on in a gay relationship. I have known a lot of gay couples over the years, and jealousy almost never rears its head. It's not really, we're just not wired that way. And I thought,
you're guys.
Yeah,
so.
we're guys, yeah, hello. So I think I might get jealous of his shoes that are fantastic, or he's got a jacket that I want, but that's about it. But anyway, I got thinking about a conversation that Eric and I had, and there was some guy from his past that showed up, and it didn't even occur to me to be jealous. And he said to me, well, why aren't you jealous? I said, well, honey, because why would I be jealous? I mean, you and I have this great relationship. I would never even think twice about it. It wouldn't occur to me. He goes, oh, yeah, that's kind of pathetic, really. And I laughed. And then when I got Ron McGee's script where they were jealous, I thought, you know what? I'm going to pull that, and I'm going to put this into it. And so we did that, put it in, and it gets the biggest laugh in the movie. I've seen it in several theaters where people are watching the film, and they just, that moment, everybody laughs because it's so familiar. Because every gay man goes, that's exactly what happened. You know, they've all done it.
Now, some of these pictures you shot back to back, where you shoot one movie and you shoot another one right after it. What are the pros and cons of that sort of process?
I'll tell you the cons first. The cons might be that sometimes the actors will get a little bit lost because you're doing 2 movies, and in the case of the Stracheys, those are 2 of the same films, the same characters. They have to remember which movie they're in sometimes, especially when we schedule it. So we're shooting, say, 2 scenes in the office that are from 2 different movies back to back. They need to remember where they are, and that's sort of part of the director's job.
So you will actually shoot scenes intermixed?
Oh yeah, we block shoot.
I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah, a lot of those scenes we block shot that way because it's the most effective way to do it.
Sure.
I love doing it, frankly. I love shooting these movies back to back because it gives you so much more on the screen I can use a location twice, and from looking this way to that way, it's a different world wherever you're looking.
Yes.
And so it makes the movie seem much, much bigger than they really are. And that helps a lot. It saves us production money, technically speaking, saves a lot of production money in the back end, certainly in post-production. But from an artistic point of view, it's really very much a pleasure to be able to have a bigger canvas. So if I'm working, say, on these 2 films, and we put the schedules back to back, it gives me a longer shooting period. So when at the end of the movie, of the shooting schedule, I can look back, my editor will usually have the first film cut pretty much. So if there's anything I need to pick up or to fix or whatever, I can do that during the course of the second film shoot. And it really, really helps a great deal. And then we did, pursuant to that, we did a movie called Something Evil Comes.
Yes.
And in that one, there's a scene at a cemetery where they're burying the fellow who starts the whole movie off, basically. And then there's a scene at a golf course in Brazil where the evil Margot Kidder is playing golf badly. And we didn't go to Brazil. This may be a shock to the home audience. We actually shot that Brazil scene in the graveyard at one end. So we shot all the this is all in one day. We shot all the graveyard scenes looking that way, and then when it was time for the Brazil scene, we went down to the other end of the graveyard, and we set up some fake palm trees and shot down through the palm trees and put a golf cart there, shot in a low angle, and no one's the wiser until now.
Ron, when you start a picture, do you get involved in rehearsals? Is that part of your process, or do you not have time for that usually with the kind of schedules you do?
Sometimes you do have time for rehearsal. What I prefer is a read-through. And not so much for the actual reasons it would seem. I like the idea of getting everybody in the room together, the whole cast all together around a table, having dinner, and reading the script together.
Create some chemistry.
Absolutely.
And some rapport. And
To sort of get a sense, everybody gets a real sense of community. On Shock to the System, it was a big cast, and all those kids in that movie all hung out together before we started shooting. We all had dinner, and it was actually the most expensive dinner in the history of Insight Film. A big group like that is great. They all read the script, everybody's on the same page, literally, Rehearsal-wise, you tend not to, because usually, especially on our schedules, you often end up with getting into a location the day before you're going to shoot there.
And sometimes you don't know what your location's going to be occasionally
That's
until the
quite
last
often.
minute, which isn't how you would like it to be. But
Not so much.
but
It'd be
it
great to
happens.
know, but also, there's a real energy to that as well. I've been fortunate, again, in situations where you would think, like, oh my God, how are we going to do this? But there's this crazy energy that kicks in when something like that happens.
What do you tend to do during the pre-production period? What things do you focus on, and what do you plan for and work on?
Well, I go to the spa. That's very important for me. I think spa
So you're in
time
the
is
right
critical.
frame of mind.
In the right frame of mind. The day before shooting, nobody can get a hold of me because I'll be literally at the spa. That's like the punchline to usually about 3 weeks of trying to find locations, trying to make it work. Casting is always critical. Usually by the time we get into actual physical prep, we have our star cast. But then you start looking at the people around it and juxtaposing faces and how does this work with that person and so on. And availability is always a big thing. We have had actors fall out, in the 11th hour, and then you got to find somebody else.
Yes.
So that's always tricky. I like working with a production designer, very closely with a production designer. We'll sit down and look at sketches for things. Because many of our movies are shot on locations, actual physical locations, usually it's about redesigning the interior of some place and making it look different than it did originally.
Well, it's fascinating how if you know what you're doing, as you do, you can pull that sort of thing off, because so much of these major studio pictures, they lose the whole sets. You don't see it, and you're working with a very small palette and turning it into something big, which is not easy to do.
And much of it is collaborative, obviously, because you work with people. If you're lucky, you work with people who really have a passion for it. My regular director of photography is a guy named Kim Miles, and he and I, during the prep period, for example, we usually just watch movies. We just watch old movies or get a sense of what we're going to do, because we have a dialogue now. We've made, I want to say 10 films together, I think. Maybe it might be closer to 13. But I remember on Chasing Christmas, the lady from the network from ABC had come over to watch, and she said, how many movies have you two made together? Because we just yak on set.
Yeah.
And that was only our second film together. And she was astonished. She said, like 2 puppies in a bag, you two. But it's really true because you get the rapport we established really early on,
Yep.
and that allows for us just to have fun on set. And he's such a huge part of any success I have had with this stuff at all is because of him. He is just so brilliant with creating
Yep.
the look for these films.
That is incredibly helpful. When you're on the set, you're known as a guy who stays very calm, very focused, very cool. Was that something you worked at, or did that just kind of come naturally?
You know what? I'll tell you what it's from. It's from being a magician. It's from being on stage. Because you literally, as a director, you're on stage all day long for 13, 14 hours during the day. You're in front of an audience. And it's the audience of your crew, and by extension, the audience of the people who are going to watch your film.
Yes.
And the last thing you're going to do is let them see that you dropped a card, or that the rabbit died in the hat, or that the birds you're going to produce have lost their feathers. You're not going to let people know. And that's a big, big part of that. And my sense of that is that you just keep the show must go on. And being surrounded by supportive people, the crew respond to that. They respond to the idea that the captain of the ship isn't going out of his mind because you've come into some stormy waters. And that's really, really important. And I'm aware of the long and illustrious legacy of directors who go nuts on set, because there really is a long history of that. And I've never figured that out. And again, you take the example of the people that you admire, like the Howard Hawks and like Mr. Hitchcock, who do not get upset, did not get upset on set. You simply carried on, you know. And if you know what you're doing, that's the other thing too. And I don't mean it in terms of I'm so brilliant, I know everything to do, but more that if you've planned well, and if you've seen the film in your head, and you know how to get what you're trying to get, the images you want to get on the screen, it takes away from the sense of freneticism and probably outright fear that sometimes I would think directors would have. Because certainly there have been days when you walk on set and things are 180 degrees different than what you asked for.
Yes.
Absolutely. And you just go, all right. And there have only a couple of times do you say, does that truck really need to be in the shot? Because it's a camera truck. Does it really need to be right there? And they'll move it for you. But usually you kind of go, why was it there? I said, don't. But that's the only sort of
But you
thing.
tend to do it with good humor. And,
Oh, of course. Well, because you know what? Because nobody ever sets out to screw you up.
Yeah.
Nobody sets out to make a bad movie or to ruin your day by doing the wrong thing. Everybody that on a film set where it's a game of broken telephone all day long, it's surprising more things don't go horribly wrong. I'm always amazed when a movie that gets made at all. I mean, it's just astonishing.
Movies are complex, and you're quite right. It is astounding when anything works.
Yeah.
But you seem to be very philosophical about it. You seem to realize that it's a job. It's an artistic job. It's not life and death, and have an excellent attitude towards these things, and really make it easy for everybody, I think.
Well, thank you for that. But again, it's just the old studio system. I mean, that was what they taught you, and I learned so much from the writings of those directors and from interviews with them and from the ideas that they espoused back in that time frame. I just am so fortunate to have the job that I have.
Sure.
And to continue to work in it. That every day that I'm on set, I'm a grateful guy because I love what I do. And I think the world would be a much better place if it was run like a film set, because it really is the only job in the world where everybody does their absolute best, with very few exceptions. Everybody does their absolute best every minute of the day.
Yes.
Every minute. And if every business that was run outside of ours was run in a way that people felt like they were part of the bigger picture, I always like the crew to know how much I value their input and how much I value their ideas, their points of view, their jobs, so that they know that I'm fully aware that while my name is above the title, the reality is that all the names beneath the title are the only thing holding me up. And that's a really critical thing for me with a crew. I love the sense, again, of family,
Yes.
of the group coming together to do something wonderful, because everybody they work so hard and they try so hard. And I think of the makeup kids, first thing in the morning, who show up at the crack of dawn with crappy coffee in the middle of some field and God knows where,
Yep.
in a trailer with no electricity, and they turn the heaters on and they figure, you know what, we can make this work. We'll wait until the thing goes. In the meantime, we can get our powders out and get going. And they still, everybody does it, and they almost always do it with such grace and such good humor, that if that kind of characteristic traveled around the world in other businesses and other things, and if everybody was able to give 100% every single day, knowing that their work was appreciated, my God, you know,
It would make a difference.
it would make a huge difference.
What sort of involvement do you have in the editing process? How do you tend to work with your editors?
Pretty closely. I like to have an assembly done before I look at it, because you're in the movie when you're making it,
Sure.
and usually you have a sense of what you're shooting and how it's going to cut together, obviously, but I like to let the editor go, because a good editor will show you something in a way that you've never seen it before in your life, and you'll go, well, that's not even remotely what I imagined it to be,
Sure.
and I love it, or I loathe it.
Right, or
You
it's
know.
not quite right.
Not quite there. And I've worked with the same editor on about five movies over and over again. This one fellow who's just got the same sensibility as I do, in the sense that we'll call each other and he'll say, okay, we'll meet in the editing room tomorrow at 9:30. All right, knowing full well we both know it'd be about 11:30, because neither one of us can show up anywhere on time. So, and we'll get there, oh, hey, how are you doing? Oh, I'm late. Yeah, fine, we'll get coffee and we'll be fine. But you get a nice relationship working there with somebody.
Sure.
And I like to see the assembly, get a sense of the whole movie first, and then go back through and make my notes and make changes and tweaks and so on. And I'm a huge fan of the Avid system and Final Cut, whatever the people want to use,
Yep.
because it gives you so many choices so quickly.
How do you work with the music in your pictures? How does that play into this?
I've had the same composer for a lot of the films, a guy named Peter Allen. And also on Kiss Me Deadly, it was Claude Fossey, I think, did an amazing job, incredible. Usually we'll do a temp track when we have the assembly done, do a temp track of some songs, pop songs or classical stuff or other movie scores, and you put in and get the sense of it.
Yep.
And let the composer see that cut with that music.
I was told that you write novels as well.
I've written several short stories
Okay.
that have appeared in novels and collections.
I see.
Yeah, quite a few. I think maybe a dozen, I suppose. And I'm always dragged to that particular buffet table unwillingly by my friend Michael Rowe, who is a journalist and also an editor. And he will call me every once in a while and say, I've got another book collection or another story collection coming out. You need to write something. All right, fine. So I'll sit down and write something. And I've done some gay-themed horror, because I love the idea of, the one thing I haven't done is a gay horror film. I'm dying to do one. I'd love to do something. And we, one of the story collections is called Queer Fear.
Sure.
And I took 3 of those stories and put them together into a script. It's like an anthology. So I always refer to it as Tales from the Crotch. But it's basically a gay horror anthology.
Sure.
And so those stories existed. And I've written a few things like that. That it's interesting because at the back of the book, they'll put your email address if you ask when they say about the author. And I get really interesting emails from all over the world from people who've read these books. There's a story I wrote called Bela Lugosi is Dead. And it's about a kid who thinks he's a vampire. And it's really about teenage boys who during the high school years perhaps sexually experimented a little bit. The one boy is gay, the one boy is straight, and they had a little dalliance, and then the straight boy went on about his merry way, leaving the gay boy rather in the lurch, and what happens to that. And because they couldn't admit being gay or having gay sex, it became about being vampires. And so they used that as the analogy, and they always refer to it as vampires in the story. And I got the most amazing emails and letters from kids all over the world, people who read this thing and said, wow, you just totally understood this whole situation. I think I wrote it in one night. The Duchess called me. Michael Rowe's nickname is the Duchess of Milton. The Duchess called me one day and said, I need the story by tomorrow. And I was like, oh, I can't. I haven't got. All right, fine. So I sat in my office at home, put a little Frank on the stereo, and poured 2 fingers of Jack Daniels on the rocks and said, all right, here we go, and wrote it in that 4 or 5 hours.
That's impressive. That's hard to do.
Yeah, it must have been in there. The story must have been in there.
Yeah.
That's what my discovery's been when writing, and even when writing scripts. If the story's already inside of you, it comes out very quickly and it works. If you have to struggle with it, the first draft specifically, if you have to struggle with the first draft and really fight it, there's something wrong with the story usually.
Yes.
So.
Well, here you are, sort of in mid-career. You've done a lot of work.
Thank God you said mid-career. I had a feeling this was a retrospective, and I'd show up like next week on the cover of the Reporter with a black box around me.
It's a partial retrospective based on the midway point. What sort of thoughts or advice might you give to people who want to do some aspect of what you do. You've had an unusually successful and prolific career, but for young people in particular who want to be involved in the film business, what would you say to them?
Find the story that you want to tell, that you know intimately, and tell that story in whatever way you can tell it. Whether you write it in a short story, in a script form, or if you get your friends together with a video camera and make a movie that way. Tell a story that you really believe in as a calling card, as an initial thing. That's just the nuts and bolts of it. And that is your entree into the world that we live in. If it works, it's great. If it doesn't work, find another story and tell that story too, and keep telling the story that you want to tell, because my experience has been that people in this business who've stayed in the business a long time, they have the burning desire to do it, and they can't imagine a life outside of it. I'm virtually unemployable outside of the film business for many reasons. But I think that the idea of being so driven and so passionate about it, people in the film business tend to get where they are because they have that passion, the thing that drives them. Mm-hmm. And so if someone's watching this, for example, and they're thinking, I want to be in the movie business, I want to write and direct, because that's the one thing everybody always says, I want to write and direct, then we have the technology now to allow you to do that. Mm-hmm. You can write, anybody can write, you can pad, paper, and a pen, and it costs you a dime.
Sure.
Write a story that you believe in strongly. Don't try to write to a marketplace. Don't try to write to a thing that you think you can sell, because by the time you're around to sell it, the market will have changed and moved on. Unless you have any kind of comedy that involves sexual activity with baked goods. It seems to be very popular no matter what season you're in. But other than that, but tell the story that you want to tell.
Sure. And
that gives you a groundwork, a really solid groundwork. And then you can just sort of go on from there. I mean, the first script that I wrote was a story that, the Club Med story that I just loved telling. Loved the idea of the story. Never made the movie, but loved telling it, and that got me, that was a calling card. So somebody knew that I could actually write something, and
yes.
that begot everything that I've been lucky enough to do from that point on. And I think that's really the real truth of it. And it sounds like the kind of thing that you should say, tell your story and tell the truth and find it. But at the end of it, that's really what it is. It really is about finding that one piece of work, and someday I'm going to do people always ask the passion project, what's your passion project? And I still want to do the story of Noel Coward as a spy, because Noel Coward was a spy in the Second World War. And the idea of Noel Coward being the man who became James Bond. Because when Ian Fleming visited him and Noel told him the stories of those years, all of which were under lock and key, and Ian Fleming went, well, if we made you straight, gave you, and he drank martinis, yeah, that'd work, and we'll name him after that bird book. And that's where James Bond came from. And the idea that a gay bon vivant like Noel Coward became arguably the most famous heterosexual hero in the history of mankind is kind of interesting, I think.
It's a bit of irony, isn't it?
A bit of irony. And that's a story that I carry with me, and someday I get to make it. But I love that idea that if you find that story that you love, hold on to it, because someday you'll be able to do it.
And even if it's not that story, it'll end up allowing you
Absolutely.
to be true and
Absolutely.
authentic. Ron, thank you very much for taking this time.
Thank you, Stephen. I really enjoyed it. Thank
Good.
you. It was fun thinking about this stuff.
Okay, excellent.
Thanks.